Hello again, everyone. I'm Kevin Adkisson, curator with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research, and we're back for another Live at 5 tour. Today's tour is coming to you from the far edge of campus, and I can think of no better place to put middle schoolers than on the far, far side, away from all the rest of civilization. Only joking. The middle school for boys here at Cranbrook is located in the historic Bloomfield Hills, our Vaughan School. And today's tour, I want to show you the middle school for boys because I imagine that many of you, unless you had children who went here, have probably never been in this building. And the story actually starts not from Cranbrook, but from Bloomfield Hills Public Schools. And George and Ellen Booth were building their Cranbrook community. They had opened the school for boys in 1927. They were opening the school for girls in 1931. And in that same year, they decided to give the city of Bloomfield Hills a gift and to build a public elementary school on a piece of land that they owned and then gave to the city of Bloomfield Hills. It was originally called the Bloomfield Hills School. As the city got larger and opened more elementaries of land that we see here, this is Vaughan Road running across, and John and Polly Vaughan settled here in 1828 from Pennsylvania. And the trail that is now Vaughan Road was what connected the wagon route from the Vaughan farm, which was close to 300 acres, to Bloomfield Center. So in 1929, construction started on the Vaughan School, and the architect is someone that Cranbrook deep passionate people and people who have followed Live at 5 long enough will know, J. Robert F. Swanson. And Johannes Robert Fredericks Swanson was born in 1900 in Menominee, Michigan, on the Upper Peninsula. He was born to Swedish parents, and he grew up speaking Swedish. He moved to Grand Rapids as a boy and then to Southeast Michigan, and he started architecture studies at the University of Michigan in the late 19-teens. In 1922, he set off for Europe and he took a grand tour with Henry Booth, his closest friend from architecture school at Michigan, and of course the youngest son of Cranbrook founders George and Ellen Scripps Booth. Booth and Swanson traveled throughout Europe, visiting all the great works of architecture, when they got notice that a guest professor would be teaching at the University of Michigan that fall, Eliel Saarinen, the great Finnish architect. Booth and Swanson hightailed it back to Michigan, became his students. Swanson, as a Swedish speaker, helped the Saarinens, who only spoke Swedish, Finnish, French, German, and Russian. So he served as the He was also their student. He was a presence in the household. And in 1926, he ran off to Toledo and eloped with the Saarinen's daughter. Henry Booth and Bob Swanson started an architecture office in 1924. In 1926, Pipson and Bob Swanson started their own architectural office. He would later go on to practice with his father-in-law and brother after 1939, and he continued designing up until his death in 1981. This is a project, though, that we attribute just to Bob Swanson. I'm sure Pipson had some influence because she was part of the office, but Eliel was not involved in the design of the school. But he was a young architect and he was indebted to his teacher and his mentor. So if we look at things like even the material palette, the bricks laid in a Flemish bond or in a traditional bond, and then the copper roof, we also have this sort of very Saarinen moment of the bricks telescoping in. And then if we go inside the school, we see this amazing lobby, which has a dome in the main lobby with this mica chandelier coming down. This has been recently restored, and you see very much Saarinen's lessons. And I think that's why this building, even though it was a public school until 1979, has that sort of Cranbrook spirit because it shares architectural features. The details with things like this great internal window where you have the exterior window leading to windows in the hallway. And I'm just going to run down and give us the fastest tour of the boys' middle school possible. It's a quirky building. It's more like Brookside with this sort of maze of corridors and additions than it is the middle school for girls, which opened as an all-new building in 2011. And so there is a wing to the school here where another nice lobby. Half of the school, there was a functioning credit union. This room was when Cranbrook. This room served as Dr. Lillian Bowder's office. She was the head of school and then president of Cranbrook Educational Community from 1984 to 1996. And so this was her office. And through this lovely bay window, she could look out on this yellow farmhouse from the late 19th century, which was purchased by Eero Saarinen in 1950 and was the Eero Saarinen family home. And Loja Saarinen lived in a little glass house behind this house after Eliel died in 1950. So I apologize if the Wi-Fi cuts out on me again. I really wanted to focus here at the middle school for boys on 3 works of art. So I thought it would be fun, just because we're rarely over here, to show you a bit of the school, but we're gonna run back to the stronger connection. And so the city of Bloomfield Hills used this as a public elementary school until 1979. And in 1984, the boys' middle school moved from the Cranbrook campus to this building. And the middle school for boys, what was known as the lower school, is actually the sort of oldest division of schools because when Cranbrook School for Boys opened in 1927, there were only 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. So the 9th graders were, in their words, seniors for 4 years as the school grew and expanded. Here we see the recently renovated library, which featured some changes in 1936 by Bob Swanson. So he did work on the building twice. And then behind the middle school for boys, we see Faculty Way, where many of the school's teachers live. And then we also see the new gymnasium, which was designed by former Cranbrook Academy of Art architecture head Dan Hoffman, who, if you've been watching Live at 5, you may remember the name Dan Hoffman. He designed the Woodward Avenue entrance and was instrumental in designing and bringing the Wani Palasma arrival feature to fruition. So he designed that gym while he was a professor at the University of Arizona in 2005. But we're moving now into a 1954 addition to the school, which has this pretty great sort of institutional modern feel to it. This is where the 6th graders come in for classes, and just to reposition ourselves after making you all dizzy on the camera, this is the bus turnaround, the original 1931 school, and then we come into the 1954 edition. And we've reached our first artwork that I hope to speak with you about. This was placed here about a decade ago, and I love. Sorry about the connection, everyone. These 4 panels in bronze are by Marshall Fredericks. And Marshall Fredericks was a sculptor born in Illinois, in Rock Island. He came to Cranbrook in 1933 to be an assistant to the sculptor Carl Millis. He quickly worked his way up, and in 1934 became an instructor in modeling and in ceramics. And in 1938, until he left to become a captain in the U.S. Army Air Force, he was the instructor in sculpture at the Academy of Art. Like many of the early Academy artists and instructors, Marshall Fredericks also taught at Kingswood, so he taught sculpture to the Kingswood girls. This is a piece that he made in 1940. He made it on speculation, so there was not a commission for this piece. It's titled the Pony Express series. Here we see indigenous American, a Native American, who is sort of gazing up reverently at the sun, and then two bears underneath. Next, we see the Pony Express rider himself, with this highly stylized horse who is sort of filling in this rectangle from mane to tail, and then the horse is rearing back. And it's meant to be placed opposite another indigenous American who is on a horse with a cactus down below. And then the last panel is another Native American now with deer and wolves. So a bear on one end, wolves, and a deer on here. And Fredericks sculpted this piece in order to to try and get commissions out west. Like all of the Cranbrook artists, the Cranbrook salary was not meant to be a living wage. It was meant to be augmented with the production and selling of work. And so Fredericks was trying to get more work in the American West, and he thought, what better way to get work than to make a series about the Pony Express? He sculpted it in plasticine at Cranbrook Academy of Art in his sculpture studio in 1940. And in 1955, he cast it in bronze for his own home. When he died in 1998, it went to another collector here in Bloomfield Hills and a great friend of Cranbrook. And it was donated in the mid-2000s back to Cranbrook. So I think it's wonderful that now the middle school for boys does have a Marshall Fredericks, and I did zoom past it, but there was a small Carl Millis head of Beethoven in the other lobby. I was focused on showing you the dome and forgot about the Millis, but I do think it's fun that every Cranbrook building has a work by Millis in it, and then it's augmented by these other designs. Now, the 1954 edition was just 4 rooms, and at some point in the 1960s, the school was added onto again. And so we get this sort of neighborhood lobby, which for many years was the main entrance into the school. And we see another wing of the public school. I had the chance to speak with the head of schools, Amy Claire Roche, earlier last week, and she told me, oh, well, the middle school for boys is set for reopening because the classrooms are so large, the students can socially distance. And so there are benefits to building a public school scale building instead of an Eliel Saarinen private school building with tiny classrooms for tiny class sizes. So this certainly looks the most like a public school because it was a public school. And I just want to step out here and show us the other facade of the building, making sure I don't get locked out. And so here you see what's now fenced off as part of the general Cranbrook border. You see the addition to the 1960s part of the Vaughan School, which has this great international style awning that then leads out to the 2005 gymnasium. So heading into the school in this section, we pass the next work of art that I want to talk about, which is this bull. This was sculpted in 1967 by J. Robert F. Swanson, so the architect of the initial Bloomfield Hills School. Unlike the Saarinen family, Swanson did not dabble in all of the arts. And so this is actually the architect's only work of sculpture. And he made it for his stockbroker as a gift to a building that the Swanson associates had designed on Long Lake Road. If you go, when the pandemic is safe again to wander into office buildings, it's the office building behind the sort of pseudo-neoclassical temple on the corner of Long Lake and Woodward. There is a building with concrete fins. Walk into the lobby and you will see the original version of Bob Swanson's bull is still quite proudly displayed there. Also in this lobby, we have the 1966 Headmaster's Award painting by a Cranbrook Schools student, Randall Darwall. And you see the boys walking across the quadrangle with the Cranbrook School tower behind it. And also on view in this lobby, we see a lovely portrait at the back of the room of a young Ben Baldwin. And Ben Baldwin was from Auburn, Alabama. He came to Cranbrook in 1938 or 39. Was good friends with Harry Weiss and Ralph Rapson and Eero Saarinen and Charles Eames. Went on to become a noted designer, did many of the interior designs for Louis Kahn, including the Yale Center for British Art. That's all a Ben Baldwin interior. He did restaurants, and that's a portrait that was done of him while at Cranbrook by another Cranbrook colleague. And I want to next head to the dean's office. I want to thank Mike Roach, the dean of the Middle School for Boys, for meeting over here with me earlier and for welcoming us into his office to take a look at what is undoubtedly the greatest work of art at the Cranbrook Middle School for Boys. Here we see The Hunter at Taos. This is by Oscar E. Berninghaus. And if you don't know the Berninghaus name, I am certain you know the Berninghaus legacy. Oscar Berninghaus was born in St. Louis, and he was a commercial lithographer, a draftsman, and an illustrator. He decided to enroll at the Art School of Washington University in St. Louis. He was there a generation ahead of Charles Eames' own study at WashU. In 1899, he won an award from the Denver and Rio Grande Railway. And the railway was trying to get people to come out west and use the Denver and Rio Grande Rail. And so they awarded an artist traveling fellowship. Berninghaus took the railway to Denver and then to the southwest. He disembarked at Taos and he arrived there at twilight. And he said he not only was enchanted with the most beautiful scene and the most beautiful people, culture he had ever seen, but he also saw that this was a place where after centuries of after a century of Americans imitating European art, this is where American art would be born. And so he began in 1910 to travel to Taos every year. He would work in St. Louis as a commercial lithographer, printing advertisements during the winter, and then travel each summer to Taos. In 1925, he set out on the train to Taos, and he never came back, and he died there in 1952. In 1915, he had established the Taos Society of Artists, and that became a very influential school of painters who depicted the American Southwest. They not only painted the Pueblo people, but they painted the landscape, the sky, the flora and fauna. And the Taos Society of Artists really became one of the most important painting movements in the sort of birth of American modernism. And I think you see how people like Berninghaus, who never becomes a modernist himself, the way that he depicts the hills and the trees with these sort of globular movements of color, I think you can see how it leads into modernism. And people like Georgia O'Keeffe, who was also painting outside of Taos and Santa Fe for most of her life, were deeply indebted to the Taos Society of Artists. Cranbrook's own second president and first head of painting, Zoltan Zepeshi spent 2 years at the Taos Society of Artists before coming to Cranbrook. And once you look into it, you'll see that it's really just a who's who of American painting who were going to the Taos colony. Now, how did this piece end up at Cranbrook? It was exhibited in the winter of 1926 at the New York City's Academy of Design, National Academy of Design, where this painting won the second Altman Prize. Henry Scripps Booth, who we'll remember was Eliel Saarinen's student at Michigan, was George Booth's son. He visited that exhibit, and on June 1st, 1927, he bought this painting from the artist. He gave it to Cranbrook schools. It was hanging on opening day in the map room at the Cranbrook School for Boys. The map had not been painted yet, and this piece hung on the stairway of the north lobby. And it was given to Cranbrook School for Boys. At one point in the 1970s, it was removed, and it hung in a series of offices until coming into the dean's office in 2002. This painting depicts Santiago Bernal, and Santiago Bernal was a Pueblo farm laborer who befriended Berninghaus, and he became Berninghaus's preferred model. So there are 4 portraits of Santiago Bernal. They were friends, and they were also worked together on these paintings. And he is in traditional Pueblo dress, but in all the photographs that you see, he was usually dressed in modern clothing. And in the 4 different portraits, like so many artists before him, Berninghaus would style his model into whatever sort of mood that the painting would take. There are very few portraits by Berninghaus. He mostly painted landscapes and flora. And so this is a really rare painting, not only at Cranbrook, but within the art world. And so I think it's wonderful that students and parents who are coming to apply for admission here at Cranbrook get to enjoy this priceless work of art. So, if you want to read more about Berninghaus, I've written a blog about the hunter at Taos, which is on the Cranbrook Kitchen Sink blog, and you can see a high-resolution photograph of the painting there. You can also read more about him on various auction websites, and lots of information out there about the painter. I particularly love the frame, and one day I would love to put glass over this painting and return it to the north lobby, because I think it's really fascinating. For most of the painting's history, it hung opposite the map of the principal explorations of North America, which is a sort of manifest destiny, pro-Americana depiction of colonization of the American continent, and what a didactic move that was for the booths to set up in 1928, and I think what an important and interesting way of using art and representation and sort of establishing a discourse between 2 objects for the students who are visiting and attending Cranbrook School. So, as lovely as it is here in the dean's office, one of my goals as a curator is to restore its historical positioning. We'll see if I can achieve that. Thanks so much for joining me here at the Cranbrook Middle School for Boys, to be surrounded by these beautiful and important works of art. We'll not be having Live at 5 next week, so I'll be back in 2 Wednesdays from now. This Saturday, we are hosting a concert at the Cranbrook School for Boys, the historic Cranbrook School for Boys, the Cranbrook campus of the high school. You can get tickets for that on the Detroit Wind and Strings page. Frank Lloyd Wright's influence and Japan's influence on Frank Lloyd Wright, including on the Frank Lloyd Wright designed Smith House. Thanks so much for joining me today. Seeing no questions, I will end our tour. Be safe, everyone. Please wear your masks, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for another Live at 5 from the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. Have a great day, everyone.